Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Jess Berg, and I'm the current chair of the Pacific Northwest section. I want to share that I'm based in the Minneapolis area right now and acknowledge that there's a lot going on around the world. I am so grateful that we can gather in this way to be in community with each other and our shared love of audio. This is our section's fifth official meeting of the year, and we are so glad that you're here. We had an online meeting in December titled A Conversation with Friends 50 plus years of pro audio in the Pacific Northwest, presented by Rick Chin, Charlie Morgan, and Mac Perkins. Thanks again to Matthew Sutton for producing and hosting. It was a special evening for all who attended. A reminder that our sections meetings are typically September through June and will either be hybrid or fully online so people can join and participate with us from wherever you are. Our next section meeting is being planned for Wednesday, February 25th, so please save the date. Details to follow soon. The subject is Reinventing the Horn, a novel approach to directivity control in a horn-loaded loudspeaker, the Biamp LVH 900, hosted by Denny McLean and produced by Luke Goodloomis. I'll toss it to Luke to share a bit more about the meeting. Luke?
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for the um, comment about Minneapolis. I think that's important to highlight, and I appreciate that. So February's meeting, it's going to be on a Wednesday, February 25th. It will be both an in-person and Zoom meeting. So it'll be a hybrid meeting. And in this meeting, we'll discuss a particular product that has kind of completed its development. It is several decades in the making, and basically is kind of the first ever multi-driver horn utilizing manifold to have all drivers exit a single horn, plus additional directivity control using electronics and DSP. So it's pretty exciting. I'm very excited about it and hope to see everyone there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luke. Really looking forward to that. And yeah, we'll have more details up on our website soon. Stay tuned. And you can, yeah, stay tuned to the latest on our webpage where you can also learn more about becoming an AES member. There's a blue button at the bottom of the page that says Joining Info. You'll need references, and any of our section's committee members are happy to be your reference. Just ask. It is very important to our section that our meetings remain free and open to all. We use Zephy instead of Eventbrite because they don't take any fees. Over 250 people registered for today's meeting from all over the United States and the world. Donations totaled $175. This is very generous, and for us, this covers all of our committee business needs, like a bigger Zoom room, and we thank you. I'd like to say a special thanks to our section's treasurer, Lawrence Swedler, and Digipen Institute of Technology for hosting the venue today. I'd also like to thank our section's meeting technologist and former chair, Dan Mortensen, along with our technical crew today, our section secretary, Gary Louie, and our webmaster, Matthew Sutton, with support provided by Rick Chin. Today's meeting will include an intermission, and we encourage folks to take a break and mingle either in person or online during this time. We will leave the Zoom room open at the end for a post-meeting hang for those who want to stick around and chat more about any topic. A friendly housekeeping reminder that we appreciate everyone using your real name in the Zoom, first and last. Please reach out if you can't find where to do this, and feel free to drop a brief info about yourself into our Zoom chat. Please be mindful of muting your microphone when not speaking. Please keep your microphone muted and your camera off during the main presentation as well. For Q&A today, we have a large group. Online folks, please feel free to utilize the chat feature to drop questions along the way. It should be at the bottom of your screen on a laptop. And I will address those and moderate as I can. In-person folks will have an audience mic to speak into so everyone in Zoom can hear your question. Our in-person folks will also have the chance to win one of 5 door prizes, which will be drawn at the end of the break, so stick around. Today's door prizes include an Audix PDX 520 large diaphragm condenser mic, with a special thanks to Steve Young and Audix for that one, a set of 3 books, An Audio Dictionary by Glenn D. White, and volumes 1 and 2 of Audio Anecdotes by Ken Greenbaum and Ronan Barzell. Thank you, JJ. We'll have a brand new XL t-shirt from Avar 2020. Thank you, Lawrence. And we'll have 2 stereo mic placement rulers from B9 Audio with their catalog to help calibrate stereo mic pairs. And thank you to Rick Chin. I think that covers the business portion, so let's get to the
Jeff,
fun stuff.
Jeff,
Yes.
there's also a couple of other prizes from an anonymous donor, Luke products. So in-person people can win those also. And then you need to sign in over on the sign-in sheet in order for the drawing. That's it.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, so in-person folks, be sure to sign up to win that door prize. The raffle will happen towards the end of the break in the middle. So thank you, Dan. So yes, let's get to the fun stuff. We are very excited for tonight's presentation, produced and hosted by our Pacific Northwest Committee member, James D. JJ Johnston. JJ, oh, Luke, if you wouldn't mind just muting anybody else, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. I think, yep, you can catch them if you open the participants towards the top. So yeah, anybody, if you're not on mute now, please find your mute button and go ahead and mute. Thank you. All right, so back to the intro. JJ received the BSEE and MSEE degrees from Carnegie Mellon University, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1975 and 1976, respectively. Worked 26 years for AT&T Bell Labs and its successor, AT&T Labs Research. He's one of the first investigators in the field of perceptual audio coding, one of the inventors and standardizers of MP. Oh my gosh, you guys, let me start this over. I'm nervous. Oof. Okay.
Doing fine.
JJ, thanks, Luke. JJ is one of the inventors and standardizers of MPEG, 1/2 audio layer 3 and MPEG-2 AAC, as well as the AT&T Labs Research PXFM, Perceptual Transform Coding, and PAC, Perceptual Audio Coding, and the ASPEC algorithm that provided the best audio quality in the MPEG-1 audio tests. He's currently working in the areas of auditory perception of sound fields, electronic sound field correction, ways to capture sound field cues and represent them, and ways to expand the limited sense of realism available in standard audio playback for both captured and synthetic performances. Mr. Johnson is an IEE Fellow, an AES Fellow, a New Jersey Inventor of the Year, or NJ Inventor of the Year, sorry, AT&T Technical Medalist and Standards Awardee, and a co-recipient of the IEEE Donald Fink Paper Award. In 2006, he received the James L. Flanagan Signal Processing Award from the IEEE Signal Processing Society, and he presented the 2012 Heiser Lecture at the AES 133rd Convention, Audio, Radio, Acoustics, and Signal Processing, The Way Forward. A few days ago, Rogues Gallery Progressive Rock Newsletter on Substack published an article about JJ titled The Other Father of MP3. I'd like to share an excerpt. In Prague, we celebrate virtuosos, the musicians who push boundaries and create something new. But there are virtuosos in technology too. People who spend decades perfecting their craft, whose work changed the world, and who never got the recognition they deserved. James D. Johnston is one of those people. The IEEE calls him the father of perceptual audio coding, which is the theoretical framework underlying every modern audio codec. He holds over 100 patents. Ken Thompson, the guy who invented Unix, personally rewrote his code and called it superior to MP3. A federal appeals court stated that JJ and Karl-Heinz Brandenburg together created the MP3 standard, and yet when the story of digital audio gets told, his name is almost never mentioned. Johnston's credentials are extraordinary. Today, we are all fortunate to be here together as JJ presents his Audio Signals versus the Ear, Time, Frequency, and Bandwidth Revisited. Welcome, JJ.
on, JD. I'll come up when it's time, but you can say a few words and that way you'll be on the screen.
Well, now that they brought up MPEG, I have to introduce one person in the audience. Mike, stand up. Stand up.
JJ, turn on.
Oh, it's on? It says it's on.
Yeah, we hear you, Jason.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, so anyhow, Mike Coleman back there was also there for the MPEG stuff. You should talk to him and find out just what a party it wasn't. Yes, he was a very, very, very handy member of the U.S. Delegation, I have to say. Thank you, Mike. Okay, now let's just get started, please, because this is going to be a fairly long thing. So let's just go ahead and start. I'm going to let Lawrence mess with the computer. It's his computer.
Won't take long. I'm gonna go
Fire.
I'm gonna go Alt Tab.
Famous
I'm gonna go from beginning, and I'm gonna go Alt Tab again, and I'm gonna go share, and I'm gonna pick it and say share, and there's your cursor.
Okay. So thank you. So I'm going to go a little bit into what I'm going to talk about. The first half, and something that's not paid nearly enough attention to, is how sound actually propagates, what rooms do to sound. And basically that acoustics part is very often ignored in the whole hearing process, even though it has gargantuan effect. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. I'm going to reprise the whole hearing thing that I did about 5 years ago, but I'm going to blow through this in a mile a minute. And I would suggest if you want to know more detail, go back and watch the whole presentation there, because that's another two-hour presentation itself. Part two, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens deeper into the central nervous system. I'm not going to explain mechanisms because nobody knows what they are, but I'm going to describe effects and kinds of behavior that you can actually detect inside the system. So that's what the whole precis is here. Okay, so sound, what is it? Well, it's variations in air pressure. Air pressure varies all the time. Yes, that's low frequency sound. At standard temperature and pressure, sound travels about 331 meters per second. When it gets warm, it's 343 meters per second. And so this variation is very far from non-trivial. It affects concert halls, it affects listening, it massively affects stadiums. And if you go to something like, if you get way up in the mountains, thin air and low temperatures, it's actually much slower. I don't know why I did feet per second instead of here, but in any case, instead of being 1086 or 1125 feet per second, it's not about 970. So yes, if you're up in Rocky Mountain National Park, the sound goes slower, especially if it's cold. And if you get down to Death Valley, it might do 1150 feet per second. So yes, the speed of sound varies a lot. And it also has a lot to do with dispersion, but we won't really get too much into that variation with air pressure and with temperature. These speeds only sound at low energies. Like if you get up to above 120 dB, air transmission is really not linear. So if it's not linear, basically you get into the point where things are shock waves. They move faster than the speed of sound. You probably would prefer not to be there. However, things like drums easily get into that level. And if you've ever actually noticed, as you walk away from a drum, the timbre of the drum seems to change, especially if it's like a rim shot or something like that. The reason for that is because the spectrum is actually changing due to the nonlinearity of the air as you back away from the drum. So that's actually basic physics. A lot of this talk is going to be, you can't beat basic physics. People try every day. It's got the most remarkable list of failures you can imagine. And finally, well, like I said, you don't want to live that, but if you're a drummer, wear earplugs. So I said 100 dB SPL is a low level. Well, yeah. 0 dB SPL is 2 times 10 to the minus 10 variation in atmospheres. And yes, you can hear that at the right frequency if you have undamaged hearing. That's not a very big change, is it? And basically, at my apologies, if you look at 100 dB, that's basically 10 to the minus 5 atmospheres, give or take. And 10 to the minus 5 atmospheres is not a big change. And if you're wondering how you can withstand that when atmospheric pressure can change by 5% when a thunderstorm goes over, the answer is that your eardrum thoroughly rejects low frequencies. Otherwise, every time a storm blew over, you'd have a splitting headache. Lowest level, well, it's tricky to discuss this because everybody is a little different. Everybody has a little different ear canal resonance. If you have hair over a ear, that changes the answer. If you're completely bald, that changes the answer. But if you have completely undamaged hearing, well, you can hear just barely things that are just barely above the actual atmospheric level of noise. Now, if you look at air it's made of molecules. It bounces around against your eardrum. That's what actually sound is. It's the molecules of the air bouncing off your eardrum. Because that is a process, the air eardrum has a noise level which is about 6 dB to 9 dB SPL. There's some debate on exactly what, but you can't hear that, but that's only because that's broadband white noise from 0 to 20. So you can't, in any one ERB, which is the bandwidth of your ear actually operates at, it's not that much energy. But you can hear almost down to that. It's almost like this is the way the system was designed intentionally. Atmospheric pressure varies, but your eardrum is a high-pass filter. It's about a single zero, 700 hertz high-pass filter. So below 700 hertz, you're dropping off by about 6 dB per octave until you get down below 20 hertz, in which point it really starts to drop off a lot faster. So that's why you don't hear thunderstorms. I mean, you'll hear the thunder, but you won't hear the pressure from the change. So this is something to remember. And above 120 dB SPL, you can measure the nonlinearity. And 140 dB, you can more or less just throw away the concept of linearity because it doesn't exist. Okay, so how low does it, well, hello? Okay, there we go. So when basically at your ear canal resonance, you get some boost. So it's somewhere between -5 and -15 dB SPL for most people. In the modern day, you're probably not going to do that well because you destroy your hearing is basically destroyed before 5 thanks to traffic and airplanes. At very low frequencies, it's more like 100. It's more like 50 dB SPL because the eardrum is rejecting that signal. And below maybe 40 or 50 hertz, body sensation enters into it very strongly. And how you separate these two out, Floyd's tried, Sean's tried. I haven't because I didn't have the remit to run the experiment, but it's proven to be kind of hard to determine when body sensation switches over from your hearing apparatus. But what can I say? And above high frequencies, 10 dB SPL for 10 kilohertz for a very healthy young person with no noise exposure. Most people over 20 years or so, you probably need more like 40 or 50. If you're me at this point for 10 kilohertz, give me a microphone. I'm 72. My high frequency hearing has left the premises. And that is due primarily to noise exposure. If you think about it, our hearing was evolved to be able to hear the little crunches in the canopy above you where something is about to jump out and hear you, and that's a very low level noise. The level that we normally experience in a room like this is actually only like a factor of 100 lower than the amount of energy it takes to cause permanent damage in your hearing. So hearing is way too sensitive for the modern day. I don't know what else to tell you. So something else, I mean, remember, that's a noise level. When you hear people talking about microdynamics and hearing 50 dB below minus 50 dB SPL, no, sorry, no. Doesn't happen, doesn't exist, because that's way below the noise level of the atmosphere. 120 dB, again, is a point at which nonlinearity starts. You're better off staying under 80. Yes, I know the 8-hour exposure level is 85 dBA weighted. That is calculated to cause over 20 years 10% hearing loss. So that's how it works. You really shouldn't be listening to stuff that loud. Yes, percussion can make you deaf. And if you just came in, you should sign in for the door prizes. So we have a range to what levels we really should consider. The answer, well, 20 to 20K. That's overkill for most of us because that 20K is destroyed before we get out of our teenage years. The problem partly, of course, is that the high frequency detection is right by the entrance to the cochlea. So everything, including the bass frequencies, all go by that that first part of the cochlea, and it's the first thing to take damage, unless you're in a really high noise environment, in which case the area around the ear canal is what takes the damage because it's got that 15 dB peak. But that's realities. 20 hertz is at the bottom. Well, really, what is the bottom is hard to say. It could be 15, it could be 20, it could be 10, but how do you know if it's body sensation or hearing? And there's going to be people that argue with me, and I'm going to say that I don't think anybody really knows when it switches over. And that's life. So, wow, about acoustics. So what does a room or the lack of do? Well, the direct path, in a direct path, you have a coherent signal, comes from the source, straight to the listener. And yes, I know there's 801s, but I'm not talking about 801s. The direct path can be localized because it gets there first. We'll talk a lot more about localization later. But the auditory system is designed to detect that first signal, even when it's buried in the diffuse field, and it always gets there first. If it doesn't get there first, it's no longer direct because there's something between you and it. And now we're into an occluded signal that gets massively more complicated, and it can do all sorts of really, really strange stuff. I mean, this is something that happens in games, for instance. If you handle occlusion properly, suddenly those cues from the next room over just get, wait, what was that? Which is what they should do, but it's hard to model. Sound power, direct sound power follows inverse square. You know, what's it going to do? We live in a three-dimensional thing, so it's going to be second order drop. I mean, it's physics. And the farther the signal travels, this is important, the less coherent it gets, because air has other issues. Well, I know some people, I don't know if you've noticed, if you're standing in front of a digital console that runs cool, everything sounds, a lot of people say it sounds more analytic than the analog console. There's a big wave of heat coming off of that analog console. It creates thermal gradients. Those thermal gradients diffuse the signal. You can measure it. It's there. You can measure it. It makes things sound farther away. HVAC, turbulence, etc. And if you ask anybody that builds studio sound, like remember a number of years ago we had Ed Simon talk about what do you call it, weaponized audio in Husky Stadium. You have to overlap Husky Stadium by 10% in all directions. Otherwise, when the wind comes in, it can literally blow the sound sideways. If you think about it, if the wind is moving at 20 meters per second, the sand is going to travel at an angle. It's not like light. There is no ether. It is a physical medium. It is the air that holds that propagates it, and so you can literally blow the sound away. And as you get farther away, you have turbulence, so you have the thermal gradients, everything, and it means the farther away, the more diffuse it gets. When it gets to establishing things like making something sound like a concert hall or making something sound like the outdoors. This diffusion is absolutely key to simulating it right. And what makes it tricky is that unlike reverberation, it doesn't always come last. It can mean that parts of the signal get there a little early, parts of it get there a little last, because these little pieces of gradient that's what they do. And then there's early reflections, specular reflections, bad. Early reflections mean that the wavefront is still mostly coherent. It can increase directional sensation if you're listening to a phantom center, but it also can create nasty frequency shaping. And so if you produce the stuff right in the first place, you don't want these. But since everybody uses pan pots, you do want them. Life is like that. And it can cause really disastrous frequency shaping, and such is life. There's diffuse reflections. It breaks the coherency. It can also help with phantom imaging, and it's better if it's like that. And the thing is they're diffuse if the reflection across one ERB, that's a bandwidth of one filter in the air, doesn't line up, the time domain doesn't line up across that, your auditory system at the higher level treats it differently. And since it treats it differently, I learned this back when I was working on PAC before it turned into AAC. We had a well-known artist come in and we played a track of his that has a fuzz guitar dead center in 2 channels that's got harmonics, goes basically DC to light. And it's actually quite a nice sound, but it's got really high frequency, incredibly coherent signals. So the spectrum route looks like a vertical line. It looks like a whole bunch of vertical lines. Well, he's listening to this and he says, where's all the high frequencies? And we're listening. Yeah, where's the high frequencies? So I turned it to the left channel, high frequencies come back. Turn it to the right channel, high frequencies come back. Okay, that can't work. You cannot cancel high frequencies coherently in a room because it just doesn't work. Turn it back to center, and the high frequencies are missing. And after we sat and played with it for quite a while, we realized you could hear the high frequencies, but they were boinging around the room, and your brain, until you listened specifically for them, your brain was throwing them away. And that was an interesting lesson. And changing the codec that was doing this to add about 1 dB of signal to noise ratio at 10 kilohertz brought those to the point, instead of being, I did a spectrum, so it was peaks at low frequencies, then it was lines at high frequencies. Adding just to make those lines get stronger and weaker by a little tiny bit, yanked it all back, it was all back, it was all good again. And that was like, what was going on? So that was an interesting lesson. You'll hear a lot of things people tell you time domain doesn't matter at high frequencies. If you have a continuous signal that doesn't change envelope at high frequencies, that's correct. But something to remember, if you have a signal that has a strong envelope shape at high frequencies, yes, time delay matters. It matters all the way from 20 hertz all the way up to your threshold of hearing. Anybody that says it doesn't, those of you who have the ability, just make some Gaussian impulses that say start at 48 kilohertz and go up to 20 kilohertz and put a 2 or 3 sample delay into one channel, listen to it in headphones. Tell me you can just literally hear click, 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 click. Okay, people can argue all they want. We had an incredible war with one of the reviewers when we did a summary paper on spatial hearing at IEEE. Nobody's ever reported this. We sent them the files. Yeah, well, I still would rather have proof. Are you listening? I know what to say. It's there. And the problem, of course, in the modern day, there's nobody who gets paid to do this research. So there's actually no paper pointing to it, such as life. But diffuse reflections get included in the room, and they don't get localized to part of the source, which, by the way, can massively increase articulation. I'll talk more about that later. And then late reflections, that's called echoes. Unless it's a special effect, they're bad. You can totally wreck the articulation at the listening seat. You can also totally wreck the speaker's ability to articulate words, because if you put a 1/4 second delay into the monitors, has anybody ever done that and watched what happened? Yes. And what does that do? 80% of the population cannot unlearn listening to themselves in the monitors. And if you do that, the people, they'll just start stuttering. It basically creates a stutter, and you can't avoid it. So late reflections are bad. Unless you want to say, ladies, and gentlemen, that's fine. Okay, special effects I'm fine with. But if you don't want special effects, don't do that. And diffuse reflections, of course, otherwise known as reverberation. And they can be very good or bad. They can help you with front-back disambiguation, because high frequencies propagate more polarly than low frequencies. And so you will be able to tell by the timbre of the reverberation what's front and what's back. That is actually a primary key in the diffuse field. Okay, we all know what reverberation is. It's always, you look at all this stuff and Sabine and all that stuff, and it's all says it's more or less uniform. Very much more or less. But it destroys the onset of the wavefront, except at really low frequencies. That's what makes it sound like it's immersive. That's what makes it sound it's around you and not in the front. The envelope also lags the direct sound because it takes time for the reverberation to build up and decay. So that lag is also part of what gives you the brain the cue that is around you and not in front. And it's what you really love if you're in Carnegie Hall, and you might not like so much if you're in Avery Fisher. Although now they fixed that place too, they said. I haven't been back since then. There's something to remember. Our auditory system has had to defend us from the diffuse signal since we started to listen for, is that noise over my head or is it 10 feet away? You need to know basically where to detect your defense if you're defending yourself somewhere in the forest. Auditory systems are really good at that. Okay, now that's all I'm going to say about acoustics for now. But now I'm going to go on to sound versus the human head. Anybody here hasn't heard the term head-related transfer function? Anybody? Is that new to anybody? Okay, basically it's the frequency and time shaping that happens due to the acoustics of your head against the plane waveform or circular waveform. It doesn't matter, either one. The response is different, and that's actually one of the things that gives you close versus far away sensation. If you think about it, if your sound is coming from right here, a 1/4 inch from your ear, the time delay to the other ear is going to be a lot longer than if it's coming from way, way, way down the hall from the same direction. So as you get closer, it exaggerates the time delay between two ears, and it also increases the time. It also increases the level shift. On top of that, and if you're wondering why that increases the delay, is because basically the sound follows your head. So the diffuse field, it goes from here around, and from here it has to go all the way around. So it's a longer path. So that's head-related transfer functions. It's a function of basically R, distance. It's a function of theta, which is this angle, and it's a function of phi, which is vertical angle. And this is what virtualization systems use. They try to find something that matches your head. People's are not the same. This is one of the problems with virtualization. People like me that have a fat head do not do very well in a lot of the virtualization systems. People that have different shaped heads often have trouble. There are some things that can be kind of used to actually ameliorate this, but it's a hard problem, and it continues to be a problem in virtualization. And it will until there's some way to tune it. I mean, I think a tuning thing should be done, but people are too busy trying to sell stuff to actually do the science again. It has different gains and different frequencies have different interaural time delays too. Not by much, but enough that you can detect it. And Disturber, And if you have dispersion or reverberation and noise in a room, of course, that's going to jitter the envelope at two ears, and it's going to do so differently to the extent that the noise or the reverberation is different at the two ears. And if the reverberation isn't different at the two ears, it's not reverberation, it's an echo. So take your choice. Some very old examples. Now, this is from 1933. I repeat, this is from 1933. And you can build, not a great, but an okay, you can build an okay virtualization system using this data by just taking this data at the different angles. And this is only working on the horizontal plane. So basically at ear level, you can actually build an okay virtualization with this data from 1933. It doesn't have all the details, but in fact, that helps because when you get the details wrong is when you really screw things up. So in some senses, this is actually a really valuable resource. And this is Steinberg and Snow from Bell Labs in 1933. So this is not a new subject. And then again, after you have the HRTF, you have the ear canal. It's a tube. Tubes have resonances. Pardon me. Your ear canal is part of the externalization. Everybody's is different. If you put headphones on, of course, you change the termination of the tube. That changes the resonance. If you look at the Stevens threshold measurements versus the Fletcher threshold measurements, you notice they put the ear canal resonance in different places. The reason is because one is in a closed headphone and the other one is in a free space. And lo and behold, the resonance shifts by an octave. Isn't it amazing? Almost like physics works. And that's why you see that. There's actually a secondary resonance in free space, which also goes up. It happens 3 times the primary resonance. That's something that's important to have. But this is now in the range of things to some extent you got to get right. So this is something, you see some work from some people, they're trying to measure it automatically. This is probably not a bad approach. But you can learn small differences. But the thing is, you grew up with these, they're built into your head. It stops changing when you get to being when your head stops growing. And it's hard to get used to other things. Now, the thing is, HRTFs, they change if you get a haircut, what kind of collar, head angle, where you're looking, where you turn your head, your HRTFs change as well from just reflections off your body as they do, as well as changes from the fact that you change the angles. So there's a lot of HRTFs that you can adapt that and you learn that, but you cannot adapt very much to the ear canal resonance. And and they're not, but this is also important. Turns out they're not the same in both ears, and there some evidence that some of that fact that they're different in the two ears is actually a powerful part of the hearing. Sometimes it helps you actually figure it out to some extent what's going on with the direct sound, exactly how. I'm not going to tell you, nobody knows, but if you have that little difference, it seems to help. Ear canal resonance is primary, along with dispersion, is really the primary externalization cues. And one of the things we showed back at Immersion Networks is if you had a really dead room and really, really well-matched loudspeakers, which we did, you could actually wind up getting sound in the middle of your head sitting between the two speakers because there was no interference. And pan pots would fall right on apart. And it would just go boop, right into your head. So you can do that if you have really, really, really well-matched speakers. And they're direct radiators, and you have very little reverberation. So that's all. That was one of those things like, wait, what just happened? And then you turn your head a little bit, and of course it falls apart. But that's just something you just have to be aware of. You can, in some sense, do too well in a listening room. Okay, transmission path. The eardrum, the transmission pass, it's a high pass filter. This 3 dB point moves around, but it's a high pass filter, about 6 dB doctor until you get down below 20. That's part of the low frequency sensation limit. It's a good thing. And the other thing is there is a Stapes reflex that basically partly decouples the three bones from the eardrum when things are really loud. It also happens when you talk. It happens automatically when you talk, so it protects you from your own voice, which would otherwise damage your hearing. So that's all that happens there. So, I mean, there's a lot of details, but okay, every step here, every slide has probably 1,000 research papers on it. So I'm summarizing violently, just so we're clear on that. Okay, so the Stapes connects to the oval window, and now it gets actually really complicated. So cochlear analysis. Now I'm going to describe a model. This model suffices to describe the results. It can't be right. Physics says it can't be right. Got that? But it describes what will happen when you put the signal into the ear. If you want to go and sit down and do the physics, and you're a better computational physicist than anybody I've met yet, including John Talon and half of the people who do theoretical physics, that's great. I'd love to know what the real answer is. This cannot be the real answer. But the thing to take home is this second one. The cochlea is a time frequency analyzer. It has different bandwidth, different frequencies. It has different time window at different frequencies. But that signal that it makes is what gets sent to the brain, and that is what you, if you will, hear. If it doesn't go down the auditory nerve, it doesn't have to do with hearing, which is why, of course, your entire brain is really good at merging all the sensory input. So telling when it's body sensation and when it's hearing, well, good luck. The same thing at really high levels. Anybody that's ever been near really high frequency ultrasonics, you can feel it. I mean, it doesn't get past your ear canal. It doesn't bounces straight off of the eardrum. It just, getting 50 kilohertz through the eardrum isn't happening, but you feel it. You better feel it. People have done this, noticed this with sonar things. When somebody sets out an ultrasonic nav sonar, really loud nav sonar ping in a submarine, you feel it. It feels like somebody just slapped your whole body. So is that a sound? Well, you can argue, is it a sound? I don't know. But we're getting into levels that I really try to stay far away from. So people doing okay so far? Okay, I don't see anybody looking 2 days. That's a good sign. Okay, so this is what your cochlea looks like. This part here, this 2.5 turns, is what you hear with. This is the round window. This is the oval window. This is the input. This is the output, if you will. The energy goes in through it, goes around here, comes back through here, and comes out. Now this is the balance apparatus. Now, who knows about the rock and roll high? The rock and roll high. What happens if you have very low frequencies going into the oval window? It can propagate around the semicircular canals and make you feel a little dizzy. There are people who crave this. They also go deaf, which is not recommended, but it does have an effect on balance. And it is a documented thing. And there are people who for various reasons, have no hearing ability, but who can still sense this. And the question is that hearing? I don't know, but it's coming from the same organ. It's coming from a different path. But this basilar membrane inside the cochlea is the key to everything. And that's a lot of parts. And well, let's see. Let's go to we're talking about the basilar membrane, the input, and the output. The oval window are opposite sides of the organ of Corti, which is on opposite sides of the basilar membrane. The basilar there's 3 spaces in here. There's infinite amounts of detail, and I think I went into this about 5 years ago. I'm not going to do it now because this could take up the next 4 hours. But basically, the tectal membrane goes across between these, it blocks, all these membranes block between the two, the input and the output, except for the tectal membrane, which sticks out halfway. And that turns to be important. And there's three different, slightly different viscosities of fluid, and that viscosity is why this model can't be possibly right. And there's also small voltage differences, which can probably also affect the firing thing, because people that have hearing damage show a lower voltage difference. But how this all plays out, well, you tell me, you figure it out. I'll applaud loudly and send you a case of beer or something, because I don't know. So this is what the organ of accordion looks like. This is the input side. This, basically, this membrane resonates. It's very stiff and has very little mass behind it from the fluid at the entrance to the cochlea. So you have very low mass, very high stiffness. At the other end of the basilar membrane, it's much looser membrane. It's wider, it's looser, and there's a whole lot of mass in front of it. So if you think about it, low frequencies at the far end, high frequencies at the near end. This is resonant. And these little things here that are even more delicate than they look, these are called the inner hair cells. These are what actually, you bend them a little teeny tiny bit and they fire. And when I say a little teeny tiny bit, we're talking about electron microscope size bending. It's incredibly sensitive, but that's how you can hear down to 10 to the minus 10 atmospheres. That's how it works. Now over here, these two membranes are coupled. These are both resonant membranes, it appears. This changes the coupling between the two membranes. Now, anybody that's built filters knows if you take
I don't see your cursor if you're using it.
Oh dear. Can anybody see the cursor?
Well, we're seeing it in the room. You're not seeing it online?
Not
Not
seeing it
online.
online. Yeah.
Oh, that's bad.
I saw it and then it disappeared.
There, is that better now?
No, I just saw something for a brief moment there, but I don't see anything right now. Oh,
It's flashing occasionally.
Oh,
There
Now
it
it's
is.
on screen.
What?
There it is.
yeah, it's there now.
Inner hair cells, outer hair cells. This is the
No,
important.
it's not moving. So right now it's in the lower left of the figure, but it's not moving.
Oh, that's useless. The Zoom isn't updating. Okay. Anyhow, these, you notice there's one group of things and there's there's three groups of things. The one group of things is those inner hair cells. The three groups of things is the outer hair cells. And the interesting thing is they fire in order from, I don't know if it's inside to outside, although I knew this once, but as more of these fire, what happens, the inner hair cell fires and that depolarizes the outer hair cells. And the more of these outer hair cells get depolarized, the less the sensitivity is. Now, there's various theories about them providing gain and stuff. I don't actually think that's necessary, but that's the argument. Now, let's try something here. Now, remember, this is tiny. When I say tiny, you need a microscope just to see the whole thing top to bottom. You need a strong microscope. This is a teeny tiny thing. And the inner hair cells do almost all the outer hair cells compress. And how the compression works, if I get 15 psychoacousticians into the room, they will have at least 30 theories. By the way, does the cursor show now?
The cursor is showing now. Yes.
Okay, it doesn't show when it's a picture. It shows it when it doesn't show when it's a JPEG. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so how this works, but you have a filter bank, high frequencies at the input, low frequencies at the far end, and it's sort of a not biologically rated nonlinear transmission line filter. Those of you who are double E's know what a transmission line filter is. I know at least 2 or 3 people in the room are nodding, and everybody else is rolling their eyes. That's okay. But the outer house of stays change stiffness and change the membrane tunings. Now, I tried to figure out what an analog would be. This is more or less equivalent, where the current through here is what you detect. This is kind of an analog, but what happens here is these.
JJ, can you say where here is, because your cursor is not
Okay.
moving?
There's a blue line there that says current here is analog detection, and it points to that. So that is basically the kind of thing that's going on somehow. But basically, the tectoral membrane is sort of the stationary thing that's anchored at one end in the middle, and the other ones are moving back and forth. So it's something like this. The coupling changes. This coupling, the resistor values change basically. Okay, but that's not, everything is nonlinear. If it was that linear, it wouldn't be very interesting, but it's not, it's all nonlinear. The detection is interesting. Inner hair cells fire first at the initial, in an onset of a stimulus, and then they fire with the rate of the with the strength of the stimulus. So there's two parts. There's a firing at the onset, and then it continues to fire as the stimulus continues. It's delicate, it's easier to overload, but it's filtered. You can define a filter at these pieces. And what these filters look like. Now, this is for another organism, not a cat. These get narrower at the front than you. Humans do not get as narrow at the high frequencies as, but for humans, how do you estimate? It's about very low frequencies. These are wide, and this is Barks. You'll see reference ERBs and Bark scale. Bark scale is the old scale. ERBs are actually a better scale. The Bark scale describes something where it is not invariant with the Bark number, but you can predict tone masking noise and noise masking tone. Nice thing about the ERB scale is noise masking tone and tone masking noise is invariant at any ERB, which is why the modern use is ERB. ERB means equivalent rectangular bandwidth. If you're a filter designer, you've heard that term. If you're not a filter designer, you never heard of it. But that's what the modern take is. How many filters? Well, there's 2,500 inner hair cell groups and about 15,000 inner hair cells. Each group has a filter characteristic. They overlap a lot. ERBs, I use an estimate of about 90 or so 130 ERB filters when I'm doing models. And there really are that many bands. It really does overlap very heavily. But that overlap now is one of the ways you can tell, is the signal diffuse? Because if the onset and the phase is happening differently inside the same ERB, you don't have a direct signal. And this actually gets really important for part 2 of this talk. And there really are at least that many bands. Exactly how many? Well, good question. If you could get a probe in there to find out, that would be great, except that now you would hurt the subject, so nobody's doing that for obvious reasons. So it's a frequency analyzer. There's an actual mechanical separation in frequencies, and the shape of these filters is pretty well recognized. Basically, this leads to the thing that's the big contradiction that drives video people nuts. In video, things like changing the gamma makes something can often make things look better, right? But if you change the gamma in audio, you add new frequencies. When you add new frequencies, you make radical, horrible differences of signal. So the hearing is much less linear than video, but you have to have a much more linear process to store it and reproduce it. Otherwise, you'll add spurious frequencies, and that just leaps out at you. And the other thing to point out, of course, is that high frequencies come in, go through the cochlea, the basilar membrane early, and go out. So high frequencies have no effect on low frequencies. Low frequencies, however, travel past, so low frequencies cannot have the effect on perception of high frequencies. High frequencies do not have an effect on perception of low frequencies. So anybody heard the phrase, other than Mike, anybody heard the phrase upward spread of man, downward spread of man, upward spread of bandwidth? That's why it's upward spread, because the low frequencies can affect the high frequencies. High frequencies can affect low frequencies, but that's because the filter is steeper to the high frequency edge than it is to the low frequency edge. So you have to remember that flips things in how you think about it. So does it work? Well, you can multiply them as peaky high pass filters. The response varies with the level, so the bandwidths all change with the level. That's part of detecting level. But nobody knows exactly what these shapes are because you can measure one person at low levels, but that's about it. You can't measure at high levels. And you think about the inner hair cells are between the two membranes. So if the membranes are moving in tandem, you get no output. So that's actually, I think, an important issue. Now I'm going to show you a thing. This is not accurate, but this is kind of like what you see on the basilar membrane. This is just one high pass filter. It's definitely peaky, and it's a high pass filter, but there's a peak. And this part here where the phase transverses really fast is actually important. The phase is actually more important than the amplitude in some ways, because what happens is you're taking two different resonances. And if you couple these, you split it into two resonances that split and move farther apart. So when you have a strong coupling in resonance, the resonance is out of phase between the two resonances. Now, if you think about it, that means that's the difference is getting bigger. When the difference gets bigger, that increases the sensitivity. So that actually seems to be a big part of the whole sensitivity. When you have depolarized outer hair cells, they're less stiff, there's less coupling. Exactly what happens has got to be more complicated. But this shows what happens when you take, this is, okay, now what we're doing here is we're showing here, this has the two resonances heavily coupled, so the split is, the two frequencies that the membranes are at are 1 and 1.1, or 1.1 apart. And you notice here how fast the phase transitions right through the peak. Now, what this can do, and I think it does, because that's where that part of where pitch sensation comes from. Because now
Maybe if you could refer to which of these plots you're talking about when you talk about them, because
okay,
we
I'm
can't
talking
see the
about
cursor.
the first, there's a pair where it says 1.1 magnitude and phase, okay?
On the left.
If you look at the phase, you see how fast the phase transitions. What this means is as the signal goes through this frequency range, the firing is going to be antiphase, very close in frequency. And this appears to be part of the whole reason you have really good pitch sensation, despite the fact that those filters are wide, because even though the filter is wide, the phase changes very rapidly right around the center frequency. And now what you see at the next, if you go down to the second pair, you see it says 1.001. Now you have moved the resonance closer together, and you notice the gain has gone down by 20 dB. And then as we go over to the top right, the gain is down even more, and then we have almost no split. The gain has gone down even more, and this is, to some extent at least, how the compression works, exactly how it works. Like I said, this is a model, it models the effect. I'm sure it doesn't model the actual physics, but it does very nicely model the effect. Now, the point here is that you have a small change in tuning and you change the system sensitivity by like 80 dB. And this is very important on the stream that goes into the brain. And why is that? Because it means you take the inner hair cell signal to noise ratio, which is only 30 dB. It fires 1,000 a second, and shot noise is 30 dB. That's the signal to noise ratio. You're not ever going to do better than that. Again, it's physics or math in this case. But it maps that 30 dB dynamic range in the inner hair cell over about an 80 to 90 dB level. And that is very important, that mapping. Otherwise, you either wouldn't be able to hear low quiet stuff, or you would be deaf in a day exposed to the real world. So that compression is a very important thing. And both of these are important on the stream later, and we'll talk more about that. Now I'm going to give you a definition, a very quick definition of loudness. Loudness is a perceived sensation level. Loudness varies with signal level. It varies with the duration. It varies with the signal envelope. If you have a rough envelope, it will change the loudness sensation, and different people will respond a little differently. Some people hear the average, some people hear the peak. And it varies with signal bandwidth. And this is important. If I take a tone, a single tone, and I split it into two tones of the same total energy, two tones, half the energy, and I set them 3 or 4 ERBs apart, now you're doing half the compression on 2 ERBs instead of all the compression in 1 ERB. And as you widen the bandwidth of a signal with the same energy, it sounds louder. Now, you know how they make those commercials? Well, there you got it. That's what they do. They flatten the spectrum. They compress the level out of it. That's what makes all that obnoxious loud stuff. Or how they make modern CDs that have a dynamic range of 0.006 dB. And I wish I was exaggerating, but I'm not sure I am. I mean, the whole thought of that idea is it sounds better on the radio. Of course, the radio squashes it further, and they should stop that. And one of the few things I will say is, having been in a symposium with both of the two people who invent the most used compressors on the planet, all three of us agree, would you please let the radio station do that? Oh, please, don't do it to your CD. But no, that's not what happens. And now it's giving their labels a way to sell a better sounding thing in the LP, because you could possibly compress the LP to that level because you couldn't cut it. And now, lo and behold, it's not as broadband, it's not as compressed, and it sounds better. Is there anybody here that's surprised? Gee, could it be marketing? No, right? Never happened, right? And I'm never sarcastic. So but loudness is a perceived value, not a measured value, not a measured analog value. And two things. One, think about it, you have to fire a neuron to start the compression. So that happens about a millisecond after the signal onset. So every time a signal gets to your ear, or the level goes up, even just over the window of that filter, it's over the window of that filter, not over a long period of time, the gain is going to go down. So what happens is the importance of the thing that gets to your brain, the leading edge, is the most important. It gets more bits or more firings, as it were, than the rest of the signal. And this changes the tuning of the system very quickly. So you think about it, you got a filter that's changing in the time domain while there's energy in the filter. Now who's ever built time varying filters? Does that give you a splitting headache thinking about it? Yeah, but it's still, the point holds, right? Yeah, but that's what's happening in your ear all the time. And that's just a pain. Okay, and then what it does, like I said, and this is things like why pre-echo is so bad. There is no masking before the signal gets there. So if you put another signal ahead of it, you're changing the tuning of the system before the signal gets there. It changes the timbre. So pre-echo changes the apparent spectrum of the attack. This is only good if you wanted to do that. I'll just leave it at that. That's why codecs have all of this elaborate stuff to avoid pre-echo. Now, some people hear this as an actual pre-echo. I don't. I hear it as a timbre shift and an imaging impairment. But the part of the problem with the codec is that the pre-echo happens in a time reverse fashion. So the closer the closer the signal is to the edge of a block, the farther away the pre-echo is. So what happens is it gives you a signal, an imaging signal that's exactly contrary to the actual image. Thanks a lot, Mother Nature. It's actually math, but the other point, of course, is it maps this 30 dB to the 80 or so dB, 90. I say 90, but it starts to get nonlinear. So when it gets nonlinear, how do you define bandwidth when it starts to get seriously nonlinear? So, a comment. Remember when I talked about bandwidth, the narrower the bandwidth, the longer the impulse response. The wider the bandwidth, the shorter the impulse response. It's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. You can't avoid it. And that's how, so what happens is at high frequencies, we have very sharp time resolution relative to low frequencies. And low frequencies, the time resolution is very low. That's one of the reasons you can't hear direction in an audio signal below 90 hertz is because the time resolution required would be below the noise of the system. But high frequencies, the frequency resolution is pretty crappy. And if you think about it, pitch resolution at 10 kilohertz is pretty lame. You know, it's amazing how mathematics keeps winning this battle no matter what you want. And what it means is it means the low frequency part of the hearing are 40 to 50 times, those filters are 40 to 50 times longer than they are. And this is really important. But congratulations, you survived. Questions?
JJ, I have one for you. In the diagram of the ear, where are those valuable crystals that dry? If I get dehydrated, I get dizzy.
Huh?
You don't know about the crystals in there?
Oh, you're talking about where? Oh, you're talking about the lithoids in the semicircular canals. Yeah,
I'm asking you.
What?
I'm asking you. They just say they're in there. Keep fluids because you get dizzy.
Well, let's talk about that afterwards because I suspect that people that said that were a little confused. There is issues with the pressure in the semicircular canals, and there are lithoids in the bottom of the semicircular canals that can get displaced. But this crystals thing sounds a little interesting if you understand what I'm saying.
David Satz says in the chat, they're in the vestibular organ, not the cochlea. Calcium crystals. Yep.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. And I see, yep, Fred Stanke, did you unmute to ask a question?
Yeah. So you uttered the phrase earlier, everything is nonlinear.
Yes.
So from the nonlinearity in the ear, do we hear imaginary harmonic distortion, or intermodulation?
That is a complicated question. There's some, because the nonlinearity happens mostly after the frequency filtering at low levels, not so much. When you get up to like 90 dB, yes, because the actual mechanism starts to distort. If you look at very high levels, you actually tend to detect everything. You tend to actually hear the second or third harmonic as the basic pitch. So the answer is yes, no, maybe. It depends on the level of the frequency. But on the other hand, once again, I'm going to repeat that thing about don't listen that loud if you can help it, okay? So the answer is complicated. And I don't think anybody, beyond saying that, yes, you start to see a very wild upward spread of masking when you get to excess levels. It's not terribly an issue, but I will say that if you have a different tone in each ear, you can get an intermodulation between them, but that comes about somewhere in the CNS, which we'll talk somewhat about later. But exactly what that mechanism is a damn good question.
Well, thank you.
I hope that was useful. The answer is
Amen.
nobody's sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. It's audio.
I may be scrolling back and forth if somebody asks a question.
Yeah, I have a question for you. You gave a very interesting, detailed explanation of the actual physical aspects of the ear, all the different viscosities of the liquids and the stiffness and the length and all these things. And again, that's how you perceive a sound. But I was wondering, how does that explain something like the Haas effect, where I put headphones on and I time delay, exact same strength signal, I time delay one frequency, and all of a sudden it drops dramatically in amplitude.
That's the second half of the talk.
Okay.
B, if you think about it, like I was saying, you're very sensitive to time arrival. That's what you just demonstrated.
Yes.
Very sensitive to time arrival.
Yes.
Because if you think about what you're doing is when you put the time delay in, you're mimicking an HRTF.
Mhm. Well, my question is that is something to do, I'm assuming, the brain processing, the psychoacoustical brain processing.
Get there.
Yeah, okay.
Get there.
All right, good.
It's a very real thing, no doubt.
I have a second question, if I may.
Okay.
So in digital recording, there are anti-aliasing filters and reconstruction filters.
Yeah.
And so does the causality of those filters interact with our sensitivity to pre-echoes?
Actually, if the filters are half decent, not too much, if their filters are very good and they have a very low ripple, probably not at all. If there's some of the ones from the rate converters we were buying in the 1990s, you better believe it. So I'm sorry, that's the only answer I can give you. It depends on the filter. People come out with these appetizing filters, but what it comes down to is if the irony of this, and I have a slide somewhere that shows it, but not on this computer today. If you make a filter too short, you can still get enough aliasing rejection, but you have spikes at the end of the filters that will actually have audible pre-echo. And that translates to, you see, in different ways, depending on how you design the filter, you will have some passband ripple. But if you get rid of the passband ripple and you use a long enough filter, yes, and this sounds bizarre, but you use a long enough filter and you design it right, you don't have any problem. So you make the longer filter that you think would have more pre-echo problems, and it no longer does because it's not big enough at those extremes to cause a problem.
So does the causality of the filter per se affect that, or what is it about the filter that
Well, the
affects
thing is,
that?
if you have a symmetric filter, it's pure delay. If you have an asymmetric filter, it's not pure delay. Now, if you have an asymmetric filter, like they call appetizing filters, that will have variable delay across frequency. So there's a trade-off between causing misalignment and like effectively dispersion at high frequencies and having pre-echo. And
Thank you.
you see how that interacts, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is that what I've pretty much, I think, determined is if you throw more CPU at it, and you just use a great big long filter, you just kill the problem and it goes away. And I'm 100% in favor of just murdering the problem. And I'm also 100% in favor of not trying to be cheap, because at this point, how does a megaflop cost these days?
Yeah, not sure, but I do have a hand raised here, and I'm wondering if we have people in the room wanting to ask questions, and we do need to get a break in.
Okay, well, what time? I didn't look what time it was, but get the hand raised. Yeah.
All right. Yep, we're sitting at 2:20 right now. So
okay.
Ad Loper, I'm not sure. Yep, go ahead.
Hey JJ, I got a question for you. When people are doing machine learning algorithms to train neural nets for computer audition tasks, they love to use like a log mel spectra for training data to do the feature extraction, which of course gives a perceptual scale for the frequency, but not loudness. It's still, sound pressure levels. They're just frequency scaled using, not not the most up to date, perceptual scale. I was wondering, do you think uh, that, some of those neural nets training could be improved if one were to use something like ISO 532-3 and use like a complete perceptual loudness, not just this Mel spectra. And I'm wondering why people do that. My guess is that they do that just because that's what people have created APIs for. And it's just the lowest hanging fruit. It's the least effort, But do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there are two trade-offs. One is what is the best way to match the speech generation mechanism, for which mel frequency isn't horrible, log mel frequency isn't horrible. And the other one is what matches the perception. And they're not too far apart, but I'm not sure where in the middle of all that the optimum is. So the answer to that is, the one thing I think you would do is if you did in fact try using loudness and taking into account compression, you would wind up with something which was more level invariant, which might be useful, but that's the only observation I would make. And using the stuff that makes it more level invariant, and then picking the peaks. But I think that most of the models already are smart enough to just pick the peaks. So it's a good question.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think the level invariance would benefit, say, a task like sound event localization and detection?
Oh, yes.
Okay. That's good. That's what I'm doing for my thesis. So,
You have my email address, right?
yeah, I do. Yeah,
Good.
I'll reach out.
All right. Do we have any questions in the room in person?
Yeah, I got one, Jess. JJ, you said early on that 6 dB was a good estimate of the white noise level of normal atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
So, very basic question from my limited understanding: why, at normal atmospheric pressure, I'm assuming we're assuming that it's constant and there are no fluctuations in that pressure. Why would we perceive that as white noise? Why would we perceive that as anything?
We don't perceive it because it doesn't have enough energy at any one ERB to detect.
But what does that 6 dB SPL number mean?
It means the actual measured energy in the white noise.
So there is energy there.
Oh, there is energy there. It's just below threshold everywhere.
Cool. Thank you.
And there are a few people that might have actually heard it once. I see a question over there, and I think this is going to be the last question because your speaker needs a break.
My question, so you mentioned that like the ear has a natural roll off for the low ends. So for like a non-critical listening application like at home, would you want to get like more of like the Harman target curve with boosted bass end, or would you go for a flat response?
Well, you can do something, you can do a loudness scaling if you do it right. Involves time varying filters. It's difficult and it's a lot of work, but that's the right thing to do. If you know the actual gain through the system, so that what the SPL is actually going to be, you can say, scale your signal so that you get 80% of the loudness at all frequencies, but that is going to be utterly signal dependent. Flipping on the loudness curve, personally, I found loathsome, but this is a question of taste primarily, okay? But the thing you can do is you can do more than that. You can also do things like measure the noise level in a room and in real time adjust the audio that you're playing above that noise level so that you can have the same partial loudness due to your chosen sound. Now that raises the total level in the room, but it means you can detect all the details in the thing. And you can do that, for instance, in a car, but nobody wants to get that complicated. And it's not very, put it this way, having done it, you can do it in a Pi 4. Okay? It just works. But nobody wants to buy it, so be it.
Okay, I just also have another question. So you mentioned that like increasing the bandwidth can increase loudness, but is it also true like on the mastering engineering side that low end can eat up the loudness?
Well, low ends will do what low bass will do is bass does not have as much proportional loudness as something that's broadband. So it's a trade-off there. I mean, you can if you start to clip, obviously you can't get louder unless you clip and you distort, and that throws artifacts all over the spectrum. But you asked a complicated question, but basically you notice if you listen to all of these really, really loud CDs, they've all chopped the bass. That's why. And yeah, that irritates the crap out of me, but such is life.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and take a 20-minute break now. We're going to try to come back here around 2:45. We are going to mute the room. So the Zoom folks, if you do want to chat amongst yourself, we can chat here. And Dan will alert us when everyone's starting to gather again. So thank you so much for being here. And we'll also have an announcement from one of our Portland members when we come back from the break as well. So, all right. Yes, now is a good time. Bio break, refill your snacks, refill your drinks. And
I have a
great.
question.
Yeah.
Pretty simple one. To be able to watch this later, you have to be a member of the AES in order to access this recording.
No, not at all. That's a great
Oh, okay.
question. We do share our meeting recordings on Dan Sounds Seattle YouTube. And it'll also be posted, the link will be posted in our meeting notes once we get those in our section website. Let me go ahead. I will reshare Dan's YouTube link in the chat.
Okay.
Here are our PNW recordings. And it'll take us a few weeks to get this up. So I just
okay.
dropped that in the main chat. And then for anyone who missed my intro, just a few days ago, there was an amazing article posted about JJ and how he is the other father of the MP3. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat again as well. Yes, so thank you. Yeah, definitely check that out. Great question. Thanks, Don.
So now we're going to do the fabulous door prize drawing, and all the winners will be set for life after today. So congratulations in advance. So JJ, somewhere. Okay. Okay, Gary, why don't you pick the winner here? What are we going for? Let's identify the Matthew, let's open up the
Yeah, whoever is doing the drawing, if you could grab a microphone so we could share in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we got a live mic here.
Do we want to do all of these now, or can we hold some for the next meeting?
Well, we did say we'd do them all this meeting. So.
Yeah, but there's a whole bag of stuff that you don't know about, Jess.
Oh, okay. Well, then we should save those for the next meeting.
Yeah, maybe pull one or two of them, and then save the rest for the next meeting. Because we got a big, rich haul this time, more than usual, I would say. So maybe just pick one thing for the bag for this time. Yeah.
It's a mystery bag.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to just tell us what you're going to start with so we know?
Go ahead and say what it is.
Okay, the first one is a deluxe LED hat light from Fluke. All right. And JJ, pick a name out of the box.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Matt Stearns.
Stearns. I wanted that exact thing last go.
That's not our problem. Oh, he's just passing. Okay. Got it.
It is Steve Williams.
Yay.
What is, oh, is that still the
So
hat light?
Steve Williams is the winner of the LED hat light. Okay, and so the next item is a Fluke Volt Light, non-contact AC voltage detector and LED flashlight. You can check your AC outlets with this.
It is Matt Booty.
Congratulations, Matt Booty, for winning the volt detector. All right, the next item on our draw is a Fluke tool bag. Ooh, nice. Yeah, it's a black and yellow tool bag to put all your cool electronic tools in.
Tom Hall.
Tom Hall, the winner of the Fluke tool bag.
Hey
All
Dan,
right.
can you turn down the gain on that?
Okay, we're gonna
Yeah,
keep going here.
Lawrence is a little loud on the mic.
Sorry.
No, you're good. But are we going to
that's
go to the prizes that we advertised, the 5?
Yes,
Okay.
that's
Thanks.
next. So
Okay,
the
cool.
next one is the first of two. It's we have two the B9 audio stereo microphone ruler. It lets you position your stereo mics on the stereo bar. It's a clear plastic ruler that's quite precise. Wayne Edwards. Hey. Now that stereo image will just be just what you always wanted. Wayne Edwards. Okay. Now we have another of the same item, the B9 stereo audio ruler with catalog and
Jackson McHagan.
Jackson McHagan. Jackson wins a stereo audio ruler, stereo microphone ruler. That was the next is this is from me because I hosted the AVAR 2024 conference. I know, Jess, I told you it was 2020, but it's actually from AVAR 2024, an extra large T-shirt from AVAR 2024, and the winner is yeah.
And that is Rich Carstens.
Rich, you got your AVAR 2024 T-shirt. So life is good now. Oh. All right. The next is a set of 3 books, the Audio Dictionary by Glenn D. White and volumes 1 and 2 of Audio Anecdotes by Ken Greenbaum and Ronan Barzell. They're pretty nice shape. These are from JJ's library. Three volumes of three audiobooks.
John Hudson.
Just what you've always wanted. Books. There will be a quiz.
Now the big deal.
Are we into our grand prize, which is, tell us what it is.
It is an Audix PDX 520 large diaphragm vocal mic.
Large diaphragm condenser mic. It looks very cool. It's kind of big. And the winner is, JJ is randomizing the slips here to make sure we get a truly random selection.
And we have
Looks like June Lee,
June Lee,
Jiong Lee,
Jiang Lee,
Joone Lee.
Jiang,
Must be present to win.
Jiang Lee.
Yeah, it looks like Joone. No. Okay, I think we.
Jiang, it's Jiang Lee, hotmail.com at hotmail.com.
Oh yeah, Jeong, Jeongl. No.
No, no.
All right, we need to draw again. Must be present to win. Sorry, Jeong. Such drama. Such drama. Yeah, there you go.
And it is Aiden Goodman.
Aiden Goodman.
Aiden Goodman.
Aiden Goodman wins the Audix large diaphragm condenser.
There we go.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was so cool. Before we get back into our second half of the meeting, I would like to invite Scott Holden to share on Zoom a bit about trying to get a Portland section going. Scott?
I guess I can't start my video, but anyway, so my name's Scott. I'm here in just southeast of Portland. Spent 20 years in Seattle, and since coming down here, I've really missed the in-person meetings. There was one at Audio Precision recently. I'm very excited to see that the next one will be at Biamp, just over in Beaverton. So I'm trying to get the word out that I'm trying to get a Portland chapter actually active. We have a tremendous resource, a breadth of manufacturers, from speaker manufacturers, test equipment manufacturers. I worked at Audix for a while. So there's this great community here that I would kind of like to get going more in person. So if you're interested, I'll throw one of my email addresses into the chat. Please feel to reach out. Just put an AES Portland in your email title. And we can start having a conversation. I know Dan and Rick and Jess are excited to do this. And so am I, but I'm just trying to get a hold of people down here and see who they are. We have to get supportive manufacturers or someone else who has an event space. We can host these in as well. So I'm trying to work at all that. There's some interest. And on the PDX 520, which is a microphone I designed, it's actually a dynamic microphone, front address. The design goal is to have it smooth like a condenser, but with a warm top end that only a dynamic can give you. It works great on near field vocals, guitar amps, and all that. So it's not a side address condenser. It's a front address dynamic. And hope you have fun with it. So that's it for me. I'll throw an email into the chat, and please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you, Jess.
All right. Thank you, Scott. All right. I'm going to toss it back to the Zoom room and we will continue. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Well, hopefully this will now work with things. So basically, we're now to the second part. When I talk about monaural, I'm going to give monaural a bit of a short shrift because I think most of the monaural is actually just a subset of the binaural processing that happens.
Really, sorry to interrupt, JJ. Really quick, we are not seeing your PowerPoint in Zoom.
Will we stop sharing again? Sorry about that. Probably we did. That would be useful. That would be useful to share, wouldn't it? There. Is that better?
Yes. Yep. We see outline. Talk is in two parts. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's better. So going to talk about part two here. This is going to be, all of this stuff is more tentative because nobody really knows exactly how this all works, such as life. But let's start with, oh, hello. Now it won't. Well, interesting. Now I can't seem to advance the slides. So I'm going to let the people who
Nope, I broke that, so never mind.
Well, so I guess we'll do it this way. To sit back. There's a song about that. Because so now I'm gonna go along, talk about more about that leading edge part I was talking about before. Remember how you get this effect where the outer hair cells depolarize and it cuts down the system gain and changes the filters and so on? It has a couple of effects. It reduces the gain of the system. Basically, after a millisecond of this initial sound arrives, you're going to really get a drop of like some 5 to 10 dB, if you want to think of it that way, in the system sensitivity. It's a very sudden, quick drop, but with stored energy in the filter. So actually what that amounts to is anybody's guess. And it also changes the tuning of the system. It moves this filter center slightly, changes the overall shape slightly. And of course, it is really responsible for the pre-echo stuff because you mess up all of the attacks. If you have enough of the pre-echo to start depolarization going, you really do mess up the things. And you can also do things to create sort of a weird echo. If it's really far ahead, the system will actually start to recover. And then you get the main onset and you get this. It's not just pre-echo at this point, it's this weird hoarse sounding thing that you really don't want. Anybody who's listened to any of the MPEG work on AIC will know there's this thing called German male speech, which is a very, very, very low pitch. It'll do it. I can't even talk that low, but he's a really, really low pitch voice. And what's happening is it's actually pre-echoing, but far enough ahead that it actually creates sounds like a second interfering voice. And it's a really creepy effect, which of course was not a desirable effect. That's why the temporal noise shaping was introduced, which is an interesting, very different, interesting effect. There's also something called core articulation, which also makes you more sensitive to that, but I'll talk about that in another minute or two. So masking, well, we didn't talk about masking yet, but you have basically 30 dB signal to noise ratio or figure in terms of gain, that's about 31.6. I mean, it's what the math requires. And you have to basically scale this over a 70 or 80 dB dynamic range plus the 30, so you can actually get a fairly substantial loudness sensation. But what it also does, and this is sort of important to remember as it scales, but it also means that if quiet stuff comes after the loud stuff, it's likely to get partially disappeared. But also, if you think about it, if you have a signal to noise ratio of 30 dB and a signal that's at 80 dB, anything below 50 dB is gone. And that is really the simultaneous masking phenomenon you get. And that's the most masking you get. That's the least masking you get. Rather, you can also get more masking I'll talk about different kinds of signal which cause even more masking than that. But of course, then filtering says it's filtered, so all of this applies over each ERB, over each group of inner hair cells. So you can have a really big dynamic range across the spectrum, say 70 or 80 dB across the spectrum, and be able to hear all of that. But that's because of the filtering, because the stimulus at the quiet parts is isolated so completely from the stimulus at the loud parts in terms of the frequency part of the spectrum. So this is what gives you auditory masking. Basically, a small signal near a large signal in the frequency domain are below the noise floor of the system. There you go. You don't hear it. Now, there's a very hairy edge on this right at the 30 dB mark where you might not. But there's another thing that can happen that in a minute, I'll talk about in a minute, that can happen in binaural processing that does not happen in monaural processing, how many people have heard about the Suzanne Vega problem? It's the signal that broke the MP3, the original MP3 standard that required the adding of the joint stereo stuff. And I'll explain that. What happens under certain circumstances, if you have something which can be imaged and the interfering noise is not audible in the monaural signal, if you have different interfering noise, you may image it to the side in the binaural signal, and you will hear it. And that's called binaural masking level depression. The first discussion I've ever seen of this was in Brian Moore's book on psychology of hearing. It's a good book if you want to read. It's a little bit out of date in some senses, but as far as describing the phenomena, it's very good. And always knowing what the phenomena are is always useful. So this is where the masking comes from. And we'll talk about the shape of the signal inside of an ERB, because this will also determine what's going on in masking. So versus a time domain. This is one of the things that really throws people off. They will take like an 8 or 16K FFT and they'll plot everything, and they have that 5 or 6 hertz resolution all the way to 20K, and it completely obscures what's going on in high frequencies. Completely. Because you can't tell if something changed across that. You can't tell if the auditory system, I should say, can detect something in the middle of that changed.
Hey, JJ, I just want to
yeah.
jump in. Somebody, I think it was in reference to the last slide, they asked binaural what? That was Brian Willoughby.
Masking level depression, BMLD. Got it? Okay.
If there's more, I'll let you know.
Sorry?
If more gets posted in the chat, I'll let you know.
Okay. Basically, if you have one of these big long FFTs, you cannot see what's going on at high frequencies. Conversely, if you have a very short FFT, you can't see what's going on at low frequencies. You have to plot something and understanding what's going on. You have to handle the analysis window as a function of frequency. Otherwise, you don't really get much in the way of meaningful information. You notice a lot of people, when you see room correction, they'll do a very long measurement of a room, and then they'll correct it at all frequencies, and it's going to comes out sounding really bright. And there's 2 problems there. The first of them is that they've spread the high frequency direct sound over a great big long window, so it's averaged away, so you're going to reduce the loudness of that signal very inappropriately. The other thing that happens is in an average room, it's also going to get eaten by the room, so you're going to end up with 10 or 15 dB more high frequencies than you should get. So a lot of people come up with various curves to do room measurement correction. I'll get that out. Too many consonants there. But when you do that, you have to just fake it. There is a couple of papers I know of that came out of, one came out of actually Microsoft, one came out of DTS that talk about how to do this measurement the appropriate way. But to date, these people are unwilling to cope with this, and it's just life. But remember, when you talk about bandwidth, 2 over bandwidth is the minimum possible impulse response. Literally, you can think of it as an equivalent of the sampling theorem. You need 2 samples. You can't do any better. That's life. And to give you an idea of how this works out in sum, I'm going to show you some plots here. Okay, now what we have here is we have 3 different center frequencies, and we have the same bandwidth. This is all the same window. This is 3 different hand-windowed sine waves: low frequency, medium frequency, high frequency. You notice they have exactly the same spectral shape. So these have the same bandwidth, and they have the same time length. But this is not how the ear works. The ear works more something like this. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking impulse response, and I calculated the impulse response by actually doing the frequency response and then reversing it to the impulse response. And now you see here you have a big long impulse response, narrower bandwidth. And I've kept the center frequency the same, but I made the bandwidth wider. Now notice I made the bandwidth wider, impulse response shorter, bandwidth half of the band, and now the impulse response is really short. Now these are constant phase or constant delay filters that I'm showing here. So this is not the actual behavior of the ear, but these are proportional to the filter at the ear. You can think, if you take the first half and flip it around or over the second half and overlay it, that's pretty much what the ear will do. But you notice if you measure something with this bandwidth, you're going to miss whatever's going on at this resolution completely. You won't even see it. So that's the point. You have to use multi-resolution to get a good understanding of what's going on. Now, to some extent, things like octave and third octave equalizers are popular, and they're very often done by ear. And the reason that works is because now at least you're getting something a lot more close to the way the ear actually is working. So you'll know if you're putting way, way, way too much high frequency attacks into something and you just won't do it. Or sometimes people will, but that's life. But what's the point? The point is for a given ERB, you want to use an appropriate bandwidth and you want to use an appropriate filter length. This was hard to do even 10 years ago. Now it's trivial. Just do it. Really, just do it. You can use, if you want, you can use 6 different FFTs, and that will get within a factor of 2. It's not quite good enough, but it's close enough that you actually get a good idea of what's going on. You won't completely destroy the detail anywhere. You can also use FFTs with one factor of 3. You can still do an FFT with a 3 times 2 times 2 times 2, and that will work just fine, and you can do that. And pretty much you can get these close enough that you know what you're doing. But please, if you're going to actually do fancy plots, do it. I was going to write a MATLAB script for this, but I didn't get around to it, so you don't get it. I may actually provide it later, but it's not that hard to do, so do it. Octave bands or half octave bands, the old spectrograms you used to see, the voice prints and stuff, they actually were on the right idea. Some of them even used bark scale bands, which is getting close. That's the right idea, and that way you can observe it in a way you're hearing it. So this is not a new idea, but you have to remember the ear has a lot of detail in low frequencies. It doesn't have that much detail in frequency at high frequencies, but it's got a lot of envelope detail. And something else I will point out that I should have probably pointed out the first half is at low frequencies, your ear phase locks. It responds to the wavelength. It actually responds to the actual length of the sine wave when it starts going with the basilar and tectal membranes moving toward each other, it will fire. So that is actually something you can detect very strongly up to 500 hertz and somewhat up to 2 kilohertz. Now, above 2 kilohertz, it's almost all detecting the beginning of the envelope, but between 500 hertz and 2 kilohertz, there's actually a little bit of back and forth. And what you find out is if you're doing tests of how many sample you can shift things by and not hear it at 48, below 500 hertz, it's about 2 samples. It goes up to about 5 or 6 samples at a kilohertz, and it comes down to 1 sample at 3 kilohertz. So that's the sort of sensitivity you get in binaural hearing. Binaural hearing, at best, with the most carefully designed stimulus that has enough energy and enough time resolution, you can get down to about somewhere between, depending on who you're, 9 to 10 microseconds. Now, people are going to ask, that's shorter than the sampling rate. Doesn't matter. You can easily put the signal through 20 kilohertz bandwidth. It works just fine. But that's the kind of resolution you can get with a very carefully designed stimulus that was designed for no other reason than this, because there's no other reason in the planet you would ever want to listen to that noise, but you can hear it. So now I'm going to talk about binaural. Now, first I'm going to talk mono, and I'm going to talk about binaural. But binaural, remember that what you can't hear in mono, you might be able to hear in stereo, especially when diffusion and time delay are involved. You can hear a lot of things in stereo or multi-channel that you cannot hear in mono. Some other things, everything is filtered. We're talking about ERBs here. You can look across the CNS, your brain can look across time, or it can look across or ERBs, or both. This gets complicated. Remember I said a minute ago something about the general male speech. There was this co-articulation thing. What happens is, even though you could not resolve this echo effect in one ERB, when it shows up coherently across a lot of ERBs, your brain says, hey, what is that? I recognize it. So you can basically push the signal. If you listen to that kind of stimulus in one ERB, you'll need 5 or 6 dB signal to noise ratio. If you listen to it across 10, you need about 15 dB signal to noise ratio. So Merry Christmas, turn up your bit rate. There's no other way to do it. Isn't it? It's just, the brain is very good at picking the stuff out of the information it has available. The information it does not have available, obviously it can't do, but it is disturbingly good at picking out the information it does have available. And once you get past the outer parts, which is to say the loudness analysis, you can change all of this consciously by thinking about it. It is plastic. You can train yourself to hear different effects. You can train yourself to hear different parts of the signal. Like, anybody notice that air conditioning? How many people noticed that air conditioning before I said that? How many people noticed the air conditioning after I said that? There you go. I just trained you to hear the air conditioning. And now you'll hear it for a while and then you'll forget about it again. But the point is, you can direct your thinking and your listening enormously. So now let's go to monaural masking. You have 30 dB signal to noise ratio, but system tuning, loudness adaptation can change the gain. And let's talk about what we're doing. You have all this stuff coming out of the auditory. This goes into what's called the LGN. And this is where pretty much a loudness analysis happens. And what comes out of here is reduced by quite a bit. It basically, coming here, you have, if you will, pulse position plus pulse rate coding at this point. And it's maybe a megabit or maybe not even a megabit. This goes through part of your brain that you can adjust completely, that you just did when I pointed out the hearing, and cuts down to kilobits. Now, if you will, that is a feature and you're ignoring it because I'm talking, but you're still conscious to it. Now it's a feature that you're noticing. But then when we talk about auditory objects, you're not going to remember the details of the air conditioning. You're going to remember the words, saying, hopefully, maybe not, I don't know. But the point is you reduce this many megabits down to bits per second, literally, as it goes through the auditory system and then through the brain. And the other thing to remember, once you get past the loudness integration, for which the only thing that the loudness integration will do is there's a detuning you can do. When you see a flash, your auditory system will actually activate the Stapes reflex. It's a protection mechanism. But other than that, there's not much at this point. But once you get past this, what you see matters, what you hear matters, what you feel matters, what you smell matters, what you expected matters. Everything matters here. You can move your focus. Like, I don't know. You notice that the way I usually pronounce things, it's a little bit sibilant. How many people noticed that until I just said it? Somebody did, but you never did any speech work, right? What? Yeah, he certainly did. Just so that's clear, he has studied it more in a little bit. But the point is, yes, my speech tends to be a little sibilant, but now you notice it and it won't go away because it's just how my voice works. I also have a actually stuck third formant. You probably noticed that too. The only other person that noticed that, there's like 4 people that noticed that. All 4 of them were speech recognition people for some reason. Because I got banned from all the speech recognition testing at Bell Labs and AT&T because I keep screwing up their recognizer. It has to do with bad throat surgery. What can I tell you? Literally, that's where it comes from. But the point is all of this stuff, you can vary. You can hear through the fact that I'm not really pronouncing things the way I should, because all of this stuff, it's what I'm saying. I'm going to say words. You hear what you expect. Loudness integration. Well, the end of the cochlea drops, but doesn't mean the loudness goes down. There's an integration effect. So you get firing at the beginning, but then you get a constant rate of firing after that. So that takes a sum as well. So if you look at the loudness and you see the loudness goes up very fast and then it goes up slowly to a certain point, and then it just stays flat until you turn things off, at which point it tails off, because there's a memory to that integration or in that summing. The first onset happens because of the cochlea, and it is very strong. Then you have this level analysis part of it, which continues going on for a while. How long is it? That's a good question. Somewhere between 20 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds, and it may be frequency dependent. It may actually be CNS controlled dependence. I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody has a better answer. Please tell me, because I don't have a better answer. I can find results that say anywhere from 10 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds. And they can't all be right, but they might all be right depending on how you're listening and what your listening strategy is. So I don't know. But then there's 2 parts that come out. There's the first onset, and then there's the total neural firing rate. And those are the information that comes out of the loudness, loudness analysis. And this applies very much to the binaural side of things as well. But remember, this happens at each ERB. So one of the 2 things, the first onset, it can change inside the same ERB if the signal is such that it changes inside the ERB. And if it doesn't change inside the ERB, it won't. So it can be either one. And this turns out to be an important clue. That's part of this, how you sense diffusion. Diffusion scrambles the time domain. So that is part of how you sense diffusion. And if you're looking at a power spectrum, you'll never see this. And you will have no idea what's going on, but such is life. And like I say, if you've heard different reverberation systems, some of which sound very smooth and some of which don't sound very smooth, part of that is the diffusion or lack thereof. I don't know, anybody heard the stuff we were showing at what do you call it, at Immersion Networks? You will notice that there was very smooth reverberation. That's because we used what we know about diffusion and made sure things were properly diffused. We also gave the option to turn it off. If you wanted to imitate a steel pipe, you could imitate a steel pipe. Not that I ever wanted to talk inside of one, but it has to be a flexible system, so you could make it bad if you wanted to. But simultaneous masking is, can you hear the difference past the loudness integration? That's 30 dB is pretty much the maximum. You get waveform lock at low frequencies, but as you add noise, that's going to jitter it, and low frequencies are going to hear that jitter. And high frequencies, not as much. But the point is, this means also below 500 hertz, you have additional, doesn't really behave as much like masking, but you have to use the full 30 dB at very low frequencies. That's just life. And for a perfectly regular sweetener with a flat envelope, 30 dB is a good rule. But if you don't have a flat envelope, there is quite a bit of work on this. There's work all the way back to Hellman and Zaslocki and some other people, a whole bunch of people who have shown that, for instance, noise masking noise only requires 3.5 dB. But if you think about it, if your envelope is going like this, up and down really fast, detecting a small change in that is going to be very difficult because you have so much noise in the envelope. If, on the other hand, the envelope only varies by the error in the system, in the 30 dB system, it's going to be much more sensitive. So that's one of the things that causes noise masking noise. But that's great, but not necessarily if you have two different, one noise that's coherent in the two ears and one that isn't, but we'll get there in a minute. Because then Suzanne Vega will leak out and scream and basically bite you in the nose. But, and I'm not saying that she's singing noise, but it's a signal that's very noise-like, so it excites BMLD really badly. And what if you have now noise, if you have noise masking a tone, that's about 5.5 to 6 dB. The classic results say 5.5. I'm ordering for 6.5 because that's been my experience, running my own experiments. This work is from the 1950s, so who knows, maybe their filters were better, maybe my filters are better. They didn't document the filters. I used actual cochlear filters, so who knows? I don't know. So this can vary this much. And I repeat, noise masking tone twice. That's something you cannot get around. You cannot get around this tone masking noise 30 dB. That's the system. All of this revolves from the irregularity of the waveform attack at low frequencies, the variation in the envelope at higher frequencies. And some of these numbers can be pushed way down. And this can be a real pest if you're trying to build a voice codec or a speech or an audio codec, which I've had the unfortunate experience of having to done more than the first time it was interesting, but such is life. Now, time considerations. Okay, there's no pre-echo. You can see before you start that compression in the cochlea, you've got nothing, anything. You're going to hear anything. If it's above threshold of hearing, surprise, there it is. And once you get close, when you get inside of a millisecond, it's less likely to dull the sound, but you're likely to hear filtering effects. So you're likely to hear a filtering effect instead of the gain reduction. But really, pre-echo is the bad news. It's life. Post-masking exists because you have that integration. You also have the neural recharge time on the cochlea. So there's a couple of different time constants for the post-masking. Exactly what it is, I think varies, and I think varies also with the ability for co-articulation and so on. So this is happening not only at the loudness analysis stage, but also on down line. And this happens in each line. Each line coming out of the cochlea, if you will, like at least 2,500 of them, if not more. And now to talk about, just to point out, binaural hearing is how we developed. This is how it works. You realize the stuff your ear hears gets, in the right ear, primarily gets analyzed in the left side of the brain and vice versa. And there's a thing that combines them and that sends information to both sides. So evolution is weird, but that's what we have. But this is a point that I will make now. Hearing damage that's different in the 2 ears is a big problem. It creates problems in localization, but it also messes up things where you cannot identify the direction of a source. And as I'll show later, there's stuff in the neural processing that helps you listen to a specific direction. And when you're listening to a specific direction with good hearing, you can reject the stuff that's coming from outside of that. But when you can't get it, when you don't have semi-equal hearing in the 2 ears, it isn't nearly as good. That's called the cocktail party effect. It's really important in a crowd. If somebody has for instance, is completely deaf in one ear, things work very differently. There are some issues with speech in a single ear that are really kind of unique. Also, if you put 2 different words into the 2 ears, but they work together so that it creates a third word by adding the phonemes, you'll merge those 2 and you'll hear the third word. So that's life. But there are people, not everyone, who can train themselves to hear one or the other, or both, or the combined one. Nobody has been able to hear both of them at the same time, but some people can divert the attention to one or the other, such as life. Now, summarize time frequency analysis, conversion of partial loudnesses into features. Partial loudnesses is that, if you will, is that array of neural impulses coming down that encodes both the TAC and rate. And that's basically loudness across the auditory system. And that has been shown very conclusively that in fact matches if you total all that stimuli, it's pretty much determined that matches the total loudness you experience. But the term partial loudness has not entered into every place in the lexicon, so you need to know that. And this whole thing, this analysis into concept and so on, this goes way on downstream, and this happens after both binaural and monaural hearing. So now both to binaural. And now, like I said, I'm leaving out details. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of pages am I going to leave out now? What do you think? I mean, I'm literally leaving out massive things. I'm describing what the results do. And it's really hard to say any of the mechanisms. I'm not going to speculate on the mechanisms. I'm only describing what they seem to do. I have no idea what the mechanisms are, and they may be plastic. You may, if you describe this, you may change what you do in your head. I don't know. Okay, so you have the cochlear analysis, the loudness analysis. These don't pretty much change. These are pretty much mostly independent. And then it goes into this comparison that has also some kind of delay detector. And then this seems to send out groups of ERBs that appear to have the same time delay, the same relative time delay. And that sounds very approximate, and you better believe it is approximate, but that seems to happen. And sort of like this, it's like you have, if you will, this is a shift register. Of course, it's nothing of the sort. You have the data moving this way from one ear, the data moving this way from the other. So if it's in the center, this detector is going to send it out. This detector is going to send it out if it's delayed one way. This one's going to send it out over here if it's delayed the other way. Don't ask me how many channels there are. I don't know. Don't ask me how this actually happens. I don't know. But something like this happens. Now, when you're talking and you're looking straight at me when I'm talking, that means it's all going to line up in the middle because the time delay is in the middle. And it means you're also going to then, as it turns out, disregard the stuff you're hearing from the room and so on. This is a really important process. Now, how it works, I don't know. But remember, this is taking a very wide vector, and it's happening many lines. It has two values, a first arrival and a longer rate. These are somehow evaluated somehow in this box that I called comparison. I don't know. I can't tell you. I have never successfully applied any decent mathematical estimate to it, except to look, if you will, at some sort of envelope correlation. And it kind of sort of works most of the time. But kind of sort of is not very satisfactory. It's very clear that something different happens below about 200 or 300 hertz. Something else different happens at really high frequencies. Anybody want to guess? I got no guess. I see the people that know anything about this are all wincing because I don't have a guess either. What happens in the box? It detects coincidences somehow. And this, I think, is the onset really comes in really strongly here. Because and range delays, but you have about plus or minus a half a millisecond, give or take. It depends on your head size, how far away the source is, and so on. But that's you can go from about half a millisecond either way, really about 4/10 of a millisecond. But something that's interesting is that I found a lot of people get an exaggerated perception up to a little bit over half a millisecond. It works really well, and then very slightly past that, it falls apart completely. Like the system is going like, the hell was that? So there's some limited there. It may be individual. I found it some individuals that don't get beyond about plus or minus 3/10 of a millisecond. Some people can handle 1.5. I don't know why. I don't know how, but I found that variation in people. There can be several, if you will, objects or sources or whatever, at different relative delays, and they get sorted out somehow into auditory features or auditory objects. And since those two are both very vague, and you can promote a feature to an object if you want to, and you can do that consciously. Like when you're listening to the sibilance in my voice, you're promoting a feature to an object. Life is like that. The mechanism and the CNS are all very mysterious, but that description is pretty accurate. And then you have something else that happens from the same delay outside of different ERBs. This gets combined again. And this, when I say across different ERBs, we're talking about across partial ERBs because, there's much overlap. So these can all be from different points of the same ERB and the same ERB and so on. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. When this is very spotty, that's what you get in a diffuse signal. If this is very, very, very coherent, that means you have a very coherent signal. And while this goes in here, I don't know how it works, but this is one of the things you hear is distance. And this is one of the things you hear is how you decide when something is diffuse, and when you just don't hear it and you don't listen to it at all. Or what's there, if you concentrate on it, like if you listen now, if you concentrate on the echo coming from the back of the room, you notice you can concentrate sort of on the echo from the back of the room, but you can only do it when you try, because when you're trying to understand the words, you want to move back to the direct signal. So all of this stuff is stuff you can manipulate on purpose. One thing I've discovered about live sound people is they're very good at listening around for all of the other stuff in the room. Because speaking from experience, you really need to know which driver is distorting. You want to just get up, walk over, and sometimes it's better to unplug one of the horns than it is to continue to let it run. That's just life. Or I have literally walked up in front of the audience. Nobody noticed because I'm just walking up like I belong there. Take a driver out, bolt a different driver to the horn, reconnect it, and walk back out. Nobody noticed. So it's all a question of where your attention is. Because the whole point, it's really true. If you look like you belong there, nobody cares. Anyhow, this goes along, and this can tell you if it's something's diffuse. There's also, if you see lots of, and to tell you when it's not. So do these happen in parallel? Maybe. Hearing is, brain is a very parallel gadget. The cycle time isn't very fast at all, but it's got an awful lot, if you will, of processors, because each neuron can do an averaging and decide to fire or not. How many neurons get activated in an average brain as opposed to a neural network? Do you know a number? Anybody know a number? Because the point is that the brain has an awful lot of neurons, and they get activated by different things at different times too. You hear this thing about people use this much of your brain. That's nonsense. The whole brain gets used. It just gets passed around depending on what you're doing. So this provides a time delay location. What I mean by that is something that corresponds to an interaural time delay. And you have the cocktail party effect. You can focus on somebody. And what's interesting is you watch somebody when you're talking over there, like if Dana says something, you see, I see his mouth move. Now I automatically will tune to that point, even though if I don't look at him, the articulation goes down. And that's something your brain will put this together. You're effectively partly lip reading as well. You can tell when his part of this noise in the room or sound in the room is coming out, and you can actually focus across time on which parts you're interested in. So you can do all of this stuff, and it's pretty amazing. And as far as I know, nobody knows how to combine all of this together very well, at least yet. So that's one of those interesting problems. And exactly how it works is questionable. And then, of course, dispersion. Well, dispersion means most mono and binaural, especially at higher frequencies, things don't line up in onset time. If you think about it, the farther away you get, the more air currents and stuff are going to be interfering, the more ground bounces and stuff are going to happen, the more things are not going to line up. If you go outside and you listen to something that's really far away, you can hear it quite clearly, as long as it's loud enough, but it sounds really far away. That's because the time domain has scrambled the bits. And you can create this sound digitally without too much trouble if you're willing to run 4-second dispersion filters. You can do a 256K filter, run it per sample. Yeah, you can do this. You can also do it adding recursion using like 4K filter and then a lot of recursion to pretty much do something similar. You can make things sound far away, but you have to make an awful lot, pay a lot of attention to how you do that filter. That's something that is a 2 or 3 hour talk with lots of MATLAB all by itself. I'll bet I see everybody shaking their head now. But yes, you can do that. And the thing is, in binaural situations, when onsets don't add up between L and R, that creates an immersive situation. Sometimes it sounds distant, sometimes it will sound like it's to both sides, which leads us to the Suzanne-Vago problem. The voice is absolutely coherent. There's almost no difference. There's very small flutter echoes in the a cappella version of that song. Those flutter echoes, however, are not time aligned, so they create completely different noise in the codecs. So when you're listening to it in mono, it sounds great at 64. You're listening to it in stereo at 128, it sounds really terrible because the codecs are injecting effectively completely random noise, and you hear the noise out here. So you hear her singing in the middle, and you hear out to the side. I mean, it really sounds terrible. It's not subtle. It's really awful. And the way you kill this, of course, is by doing some difference coding. And if you're really running out of bits, you just turn off the difference so there's no independent noise out there. And that's what happens. And that's why there's the joint stereo coding mode of MP3, which is, by the way, done wrong, but that's all they let me put in the standard. You were there, Mike. Remember that argument? You should send a vector. We don't want to send more side. The entire committee, with a few people excepting it, was opposed massively to side information. Even if the side information, if you send 100 bits per block of side information and say 300 bits from the rest of the signal, why wouldn't you do that? Well, I do it, but they didn't want more side information. Side information is bad. It's a waste of bits. Well, it's not a waste of bits if you can do better, but that's life. Sorry, end of rant. I'm not going to name names. But the whole thing, my point is, dispersion basically means things don't line up. The farther away, distance, when things don't add up between left and right, they come in from the sides, or they just sound strange, or it sounds like it's all around you. And one of the things I will say about dispersion, there is literally an infinite number of ways to do dispersion. Most of them sound utterly bizarre. So you want to consider what you're trying to accomplish. And I think this points to what you accomplish, because if you obey this idea of, you know, scrambling the time arrival inside of an ERB, it works really well, which is why you have to have longer filters, because you have to scramble it at lower frequencies. But there you go. I don't know what else to say. In binaural situations, you know, you become more sensitive to a lot of effects. And distance can go into immersive as the time differences across ERBs get bigger, 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 bigger. That's something can only happen in a large space. So it sounds like a large space. And then the first arrival, if you don't have real diffusion, it's really, yeah, first arrival that isn't really terribly diffused. That's why you can tell direction in even outside in at a far distance. But the thing is you can localize it, but the degree of localization gets worse and worse and worse the farther away you get. And directional sensation, level shift, pan pots do work as long as you don't have a signal with any time cues. So this is the, who recording types have heard the term the glockenspiel effect? Yeah. What is the glockenspiel effect? That attack is 100% time cue. If you pan pot it to the left, it's going to be, that attack is going to come out smack dab center. Your brain is just, it's right there. And then the ring is going to be over there. Now there's a way to get around that. You use proper delay panning. It works great. But people don't do that. Such is life. And yes, you can do delay panning, and it also increases the sweet spot you can listen in, but people don't do that either. We have some old papers that say delay panning doesn't work. These people that said delay panning doesn't work tried 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 milliseconds. To try it, to make it work, you need 0.05, 0.1, 0.15, 0.2 milliseconds, not 5, 10, 15, 20. You know, it doesn't work at all. Which leads me to another pet peeve that people say you can't hear anything, any effects, any stereo effects under 90 hertz. You can't hear location, granted. You can, however, by having slight out of phase in the two ears, have massive, really, really surprisingly large sense of width in the room. Anybody who's got a single subwoofer here, and you notice how everything sounds a little like, it sounds like part of the room is really narrow and tight. That's because the thing is coherent. You really need to, if you look at the coherence of low frequencies in a large, good venue, you'd be surprised. It gets broken up down to the lower, all the way down to 20 hertz. But you can hear this down to at least 40 hertz. Now, it's not direction. You cannot get direction. Absolutely granted. The test that did this in 1940 was right. But you can hear spatial effects down to at least 40 hertz, if not lower. I don't know when. This is why I don't generally do processing that has any dot ones in it. You know, you should just use down to 40 hertz. Just please use full range speakers, please. Yeah, I know. But pan pots level plus panning works actually the axis shift, but it's really hard to quantify. And well, you can demonstrate this very nicely. And this brings me to another thing I didn't mention, but I'm going to mention now because I thought of it, is that one of the things that same 1933 paper showed, that I showed the HRTS for, another thing it showed is the center speaker is key to proper imaging. If you have two speakers doing a phantom center, you get about a 4 dB interference because of the cross HRTFs. And that steps, that plus the time delay for the steps directly on some of the early distance cues. And what chapter 13 of the Fletcher book, the ASA republication of the Fletcher work shows, is that you lose distance cues in the center. You notice for a phantom center image, you know, it's harder to hear distance. You've noticed, and how you always have to put that little presence curve in at center. That's because of that interference. The irony is with 3 channels, it doubles the frequency at which that interference happens, pushes it right up out of the range where it hurts you. And now you get good, with 3-channel front, you get good depth cues, and you lose it with 2. That center channel is the most important channel. And also the other thing you have to look at is delay to side and back. If you're trying to do something like have a very reverberant space and still have somebody understand what's going on, you have to delay the reverb a lot. Think about if you're in a great big hall, you've got what is 30, it's a quarter to half a second to the back of the hall, right? If you put in that kind of delay with the appropriate reverberation and so on, you simply hear that as a separate effect. You can still concentrate on the leading edge of the direct sound just fine, even if the reverberant sound is louder. But if the spectrum of the reverberation is only 25 milliseconds late, and it's the same as the spectrum of the direct, that's going to muddle up the articulation to no end. So you really want that distance separation. It's a broadband diffuse effect. Your brain handles it completely differently. So you can actually do a really live room and have it everything understood perfectly well. But you have to handle the time delays correctly. And it is, I will say, better if you do it from the back. I'll talk more about that in a minute, a little bit. I just got out of order here. Like I said, this is something, stick to low frequency radiators below 40, please. For effects, I'm not going to say effects are effect. You do whatever you want to do with effects. That's a different problem. I'm talking about verisimilitude. Try to make it sound real. Time delays, 30 milliseconds and up. You know, you can do that. You can get echoes. You can get reverberation. But what you can do, this is what you get at a hall. And you can do this incredibly well with 5 and 7 channel systems because you also have the HRTFs helping you. But the interesting thing, 5-channel systems, you want back speakers, not side speakers. This is something I was demonstrating years ago at AT&T when I was doing that array microphone work. What happened, what you found out is if you put the speakers on the side, and we had 7, and you could switch them between, well, you just switch between different speakers, but identical speakers. Put it in the side with a bunch of recordings I did, it sounded all boomy. If you put the same signal in the back, it sounded like the hall sustain, and it wasn't boomy. So you need some of that coming from the back. It's the HRTFs really help you there. It needs to be specifically behind the pin of shadow. So, and it works better. It works even better in 7. They don't have any access to them anymore, but I had some really, really good demos in 7-channel where you had 6-second hang time in the hall and you could understand perfectly well what was going on in the front. And you could, and when a person stopped talking, you just hear it fade. So that's what you can do, but you got to do it right. And I have run out of words, and I've also sort of run out of vocal cords. So I guess we can go back to questions again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, JJ. Yeah, do we have questions in the room?
Yes.
You mentioned avoid 0.1 systems, so you're not a big fan of subwoofers?
Yeah. No, I'm not.
Oh, interesting.
Nuts to those.
What about the like television, audiovisual? If you're going to put on Jurassic Park, don't you want to hear the T-Rex come thumping down?
Well, the whole point is, wouldn't it be nice if that felt like it was actually a big wide thing coming at you? You can't do that with one subwoofer.
Oh, thanks.
We've got a question in Zoom from Tom Stiles. Tom?
Tom, go ahead.
Well, thank you. So I've been to a bunch of immersive audio AES presentations in the last couple of years where I make a nuisance of myself by bringing up to the presenters that they're not distinguishing the difference between dispersive immersion in the sense of being surrounded by sound versus 360-degree location of sound, and that these are two different things. I think this is the first presentation where I've actually heard someone not only describe those differences, but address how the brain is actually treating those experiences differently. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You can't get around it if you actually examine the field. It's there. I don't know how you can avoid it.
Well, some people are.
I'm not going to go there, but yeah, I have some very strong opinions on some of
Thank
the
you.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So I noticed in the diagram you showed kind of near the start of the various bandwidths of the signals in the chain. So from the ear itself, there's about 10 megabits, and then once it passes through the second stage, it's cut out about to a tenth of it. Yeah, there we go. So you start out with 10 megabits, then you go down to a megabit. So for I guess standard digital, like a 48 kilohertz signal is about 48 kilohertz, 24 bits is about a megabit.
4 megabits.
Is it 4 or anyway?
Well, CD. I'm talking for CD, so that's 40.
Oh yeah, stereo. It's
yeah
multi-channel, but for a single channel, I guess it's one point.
Well, 7.7 megabits.
Yeah. So it's 44. So around it's about a tenth of what's coming out of the ear. And
this is a very, very broad analysis, so it's heavily redundant. There's no question.
So that was my question. How much of this is redundant information, and how much of it is
obviously Shannon lives, so all of it. I mean, but the catch is that redundancy now is also now capturing things like acoustic effects and room effects, which don't come off of the CD. But yeah, it's got to be redundant. I mean, I'm sorry. Shannon was right, you know.
Yeah, he had a point. He did. So is it the multi-channel systems that are sort of able to put in the missing information that you don't get out of like a stereo?
It's possible. I wish they would do better jobs of sourcing their material, but yes. I mean, sort of the multi-channel people all find me irritating because I keep pointing things out, but such is life. You know, the coding people found me irritating. Right, Mike?
Well, on the other hand, you're the first person that has made me actually consider investigating getting a 5-channel system. I've never thought of that before. And thank you for saying that about subwoofers. You're the only other person that I've met that shares my opinion on that.
Well, I can tell you at least 2 other people that say that, which are Tom Holman and David Griesinger. So I'd say that's a pretty good crowd. I mean, and all of us have been heckled by somebody from a very large corporation in San Francisco who just don't want to hear it. Others? Question?
I'll put out a question. So a couple slides downstream from here, you had the correlation between, I guess, left and right as 2 shift registers operating in opposite directions. Yes. Could that also be just done in the frequency domain by multiplying the spectra, and then inverse transform?
That doesn't seem to be the way things get detected, but who knows how the brain does it.
Otherwise you have to have these signals going.
Yeah, and how do they do that? I don't know. I mean, but it could be frequency domain. But if you think about the sampling, the frequency sampling is too low to do that very well. The frequency sampling in the ear is a little bit too low to do that well, but it's possible. Who knows? This is a good model, but I don't know if that happens that way or not. Like I keep saying, nobody knows.
Okay.
For instance, John Allen insists this is what happens. Dead Geisa says he's out of his mind, but they're both experts and they both know what they're talking about. So I'm not taking a position. I'm just saying this is the phenomenon you observe. You can certainly do it in the frequency domain, but you probably want better sampling Although you could probably talk to Jamie Angus and she could probably tell you how to do this as a sparse sampling problem. But sorry, do you know what I mean by okay?
That's it for here, Jess.
Oh.
One more follow-up. You mentioned joint stereo is not done properly in MP3. Are there codecs that do actually do joint stereo?
AAC.
AAC does it properly. Okay.
All right, we've got just a lot of thank yous in the chat, and also a question about tinnitus. What causes it, and
Well,
what cures it?
There's at least nothing cures it. There's at least 2 or 3 different causes. One of them is an inner hair cell that just fires randomly because it's had the crap beat out of it. There's also a possibility, and some people appear to have actually otoacoustic version of tinnitus that comes about because the outer hair cell is misfiring and actually shaking the basilar membrane and triggering the inner hair cell. One of those sounds like broadband noise. The other one sounds like a single tone, supposedly, but all of this is speculation because you can't get to the apparatus to find out what it's doing. And then there's some arguments that some of it comes from on down in the loudness analysis thing where neurons are firing randomly because there's no longer any stimulus going to them, so they just charge up until they fire. So the answer to your question is yes.
I would like to add too, I've heard recently there's some apps that have been developed, like the mindear.com Mind Ear app from Australia. Just starting to hear more talks about that. So just to try to help retrain the brain to kind of ignore things.
Well, that's the thing. One thing you can certainly do is you can train yourself not to hear it. I mean, I have horrible tinnitus, but it doesn't bother me at all, except when I'm trying to hear something about 5.5 kilohertz, in which case I can hear it. Let's just say I can hear 8 kilohertz better than I can hear 5.5.
Yep.
Can I address the tinnitus issue?
I don't know. Can you?
Yes, I've had it for 15 years. Caused by loud noise twice. The doctor first put me on a prescription medication, nortriptyline, otherwise known as Elavil. It's a tricyclic antidepressant. And when I started on the very first dose, the sound in my head moved around. And after going up to 75 milligrams, my sound, the noise level decreased by maybe half and enough for me to be able to go back to work. And every time I got better hearing aids, the improvement was a little bit better. And I am now 14 months into using this thing, the linear dual modality stimulation device. And the doctors, the neurologists at UC San Diego and UC Irvine are working on that method of 2 different types of stimulation. One is a message that you listen to in your ear, and this one is off of this device. You put this on your tongue and you get a little electrical stimulation on your tongue, and you wear it for twice a day for 30 minutes for the program. And I've been on it for about 14 months now, and I would say that I have about between a 3 and 4 decibel reduction in my noise level, starting about 2 or 3 hours after I wake up and on for the rest of the day. Didn't happen automatically. It didn't happen overnight. It took, 8, 10, 12 months before I started noticing that in my case, it's helping. So there are things to help, and there is a support group called the American Tinnitus Association. I was on a Zoom this morning from the Bay Area Tinnitus Group. I sit in on 3 Zooms from 3 different tinnitus groups.
We should get them to talk here. So I wonder if we can get somebody like that to talk, because you're completely out of anything I know about. Okay.
Yeah, the scientists now really believe that the noise that we hear is not from the inner ear hair cells, but it's the next step up between that and into the brain itself. And somewhere along the line there's damage in nerve, because people have different types of noises, and people can hear noise as if it's from outside their head or inside their head. And that's merely because the brain, whatever part of the brain got damaged, is what part you're going to hear or not hear noise about.
Yeah.
And there's no predicting it. So yes, it would be a good idea.
That would be good because now you're completely out of my field here. The
And
stuff
the first, yeah.
the stuff I've dealt with has only been mild tinnitus. I don't have that so far I've avoided that terrible, the only thing you can hear is a shriek problem.
Oof. Yeah,
which
thanks.
I have to say is a miserable problem.
Oof.
Yes.
Thanks, Don. If you would, if you're up for it, to maybe send me an email from my, and I'd love to follow up and maybe for
put your email in the chat. I'm not a member. I'm a chatter.
Okay.
Oops. Come back here. Come back here.
All right. Do we have any other
There we
questions
go.
from
There
the
we
Zoom
go.
room?
Chat.
Let's see here.
There was a comment by Elliot in the chat. My tinnitus was caused by my occipital neuralgia. Once I had a radio frequency ablation, my tinnitus has significantly gone away. My tinnitus was never caused by noise exposure, but a traumatic brain injury.
Oh,
yikes. Glad that's better.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Elliot and Don. And thank you.
Don is speaking unmuted.
Oh.
Okay. There's a guy who spent a lot of time developing a sound device built into a pillow, and it's called the Sound Pillow. And the trick was first to make it where you can put your head on it and not break it, a little speaker, and a speaker that would be quiet enough but sturdy enough to provide the type of sound. And in addition to helping people with tinnitus, the military has found that this is helping a lot of people who have post-trauma stress. So even if they don't have tinnitus, but they have the horrible nightmares and all the other mental anguish, that the soothing sounds provided by the sound pillow help them improve their lives a lot.
Nobody understands.
Wow.
Nobody understands the CNS that I know of.
Do we have any other questions online or in the room? I know at some point we're going to need to wrap and undock here because got to load out the audio gear. But I just want to say thank you so much to everyone. It really takes a village to put these on, and a huge thank you to JJ for all of your contributions and shining your light and putting these together to share with the world. It means a lot. Yeah. So, all right. Yep. Round of applause. Thank you all. Dan, are you still talking, or are we gonna disconnect?
I think we should network in the room if we're going to do that, and network online separately.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Jess.
Yep. Thanks, Dan, and everyone in person. Hope to see you again soon.